Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. We are live, ladies and gentlemen. Don't adjust your screen. That is right. It is Donald Kendal stepping in as host. We are 6 months, just 6 months into the Trump administration 2.0, and the age of Trump is already in full swing. National Review hails the presidency as, quote, truly historic, outlining a laundry list of accomplishments that he has already achieved. Also, the left and the right are clashing over what Trump's federal takeover of Washington, D.C. really means. Is it a bold reset of a broken city or a dangerous power grab? And lastly, California Governor Gavin Newsom is threatening political counterstrike over Texas's redistricting push, setting the stage for another coast-to-coast political showdown. We're going to be talking about all this and more on episode 506 of the In the Tank podcast. Oh, just cut off. All right. Hey, welcome to the In the Tank podcast. Not as always, this is your host, the Donald Kendal. Before I introduce all the people, let me just say that I just want to praise the production quality of this show. When I step away from the show and come back to it, really see how glorious it looks. So special thanks to producer extraordinaire Andy Singer in the background. Just the intro alone is enough of a reason for you to go to heartland.org/inthetank and donate to this show, because this is a shoestring budget making it look this good. Just an FYI there. But like I said, welcome to the In the Tank podcast. I've got what is pretty much the normal crew minus Linnea. She is gone this week. She'll be back next week. But I've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing just great. I see that in the chat. Catherine Burke said that the artwork on that thumbnail reminds her of Atlas Shrugged, and it does. But I do want to apologize to our viewers. I mean, Donnie did use knockoff Chinese AI for that portrait of Trump. The rest of it looks so great. And then the portrait of Trump just looks like knockoff Chinese AI. But hey, close enough. Close enough for government work, which we'll be talking about.
Yeah, good enough. You knew who it was when you looked at it. Also joining us, we have Sam Karnick, Senior Fellow for the Emerging Issues Center here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
Doing great, Donald. How are you?
Wonderful, as always. Before we get going, audio-only listeners, if you would, leave a review for us on iTunes. That would be greatly appreciated. And if you are an audio-only listener, consider joining the show live, where we are streaming this on YouTube and Rumble and X and Facebook on Thursdays at noon Central Time. You can join the conversation, send your comments and questions. It's possible to show your comment on the screen or answer your questions on the fly. We're also demonetized by YouTube. So like I said, you can go to heartland.org/inthetank if you want to financially support the show. We can't do super chats anymore. YouTube doesn't like the things that we talk about on this show. And why would they? We really, bring the truth full and unadulterated. So yeah, that would be a great thing to do. We've got a lot of topics to get into. Even when I am not on the show, I do make a habit of watching the show. And last week, you guys talked about a handful of topics that I wish I was on for. If you haven't checked out last week's episode, you definitely should. They started off with a segment of Jim Acosta doing that crazy AI interview. That was just bananas, absolutely bananas. So if you haven't heard about that one, check it out. It's a sickening story, but the commentary around it was pretty good. But you also talked about this topic of Sam Altman and artificial intelligence. Or no, I don't think you brought up Sam Altman. You were specifically talking about the prime minister in Sweden that came out and admitted during an interview that he uses ChatGPT as basically a second opinion when it comes to coming up with policy for the Swedish country. And I wish I was there for that, because I actually just wrote an article about this, or at least partly about this, that was just published in the Washington Times just yesterday. So you can go and check that out. But I wanted to bring this up again because I had a slightly different angle on it that was not brought up in the conversation last week. So since it's AI and I claim that as my domain, I demanded that we bring this up again before we get into our main topics. So I want to first start off by playing a video. So this video, and I'll banter a little bit while Andy gets it set up, is a video of Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, the most influential AI company out there right now. The video is of Altman talking at a recent Federal Reserve event in late July. He is asked by one of the audience people about the things that keep him up at night when it comes to AI. And the video is him outlining three scary categories. So, Andy, please go ahead and play that video.
Decades of sci-fi telling us that AI is eventually going to kill us all. What does keep you up at night?
I think there's three scary categories. There's a bad guy gets super intelligence first and misuses it before the rest of the world has a powerful enough version to defend. So an adversary of the US says, I'm going to use this super intelligence to design a bioweapon to take down the United States power grid, to, break into the financial system and take everyone's money. That's broad category one. I think that the bio capability of these models, the cybersecurity capability of these models, these are getting quite significant. We continue to flash the warning lights on this. I think the world is not taking us seriously. I don't know what else we can do there, but this is a very big thing coming. Category two is the sort of broadly called loss of control incidents, where that's kind of like the sci-fi movie. The AI is like, oh, I don't actually want you to turn me off. I'm afraid I can't do that, whatever. There's a lot of work we and other companies do on model alignment to prevent that from happening. But as these systems become so powerful, that's a real concern. The third one is, to me, more difficult to imagine, but quite scary. And I'll explain what it is, and then I'll give a short-term and a long-term example. This is the category where the models kind of accidentally take over the world. They never wake up. They never do the sci-fi thing. They never open the pod bay doors, but they just become so ingrained in society, and they're so much smarter than we are. And we can't really understand what they're doing, but we do kind of have to rely on them. And even without a drop of malevolence from anyone, society can just veer in a sort of strange direction. But this phenomenon, I think, is a really big deal. In the short term, you can see it where people we call this emotional over-reliance. People rely on ChatGPT too much. There's young people who just say, I can't make any decision in my life without telling ChatGPT everything that's going on. It knows me. It knows my friends. I'm going to do whatever it says. That feels really bad to me. The longer term category is, what if AI gets so smart that the president of the United States cannot do better than following ChatGPT 7's recommendation? That might be the right decision in any individual case, but it means that society has collectively transitioned a significant part of decision making to this very powerful system that is learning from us, improving for us, evolving with us, but in ways we don't totally understand. So that's the third category of how I think things can go wrong.
Yes. So, I thought this was a very interesting clip. I mean, the first two things, I'm a big Terminator fan. So the idea of AI coming to life and doing all that's interesting to me. But I want to focus on that last scenario, the one where AI kind of accidentally takes over the world. So this is where I think that we're already getting. I know people in my personal life that already rely on ChatGPT to make decisions for them. Sometimes it's dietary related, or having it craft a workout routine, that sort of stuff. But other times it's about life decisions, or even career decisions, where you're typing in all of the factors and then having it suggest what you do in some of these scenarios. And this is also what I think that Swedish prime minister story is a small example of. Are we already getting to a point where governments and perhaps business leaders are delegating some degree of their critical thinking to artificial intelligence. So, like I said, I wrote this piece that was published at the Washington Times. It's titled "Sam Altman's Worst Case AI Scenario May Already Be Here." Again, check that out if you want. In addition to the Swedish example, I also noted a recent announcement from OpenAI that they were going to be offering their new ChatGPT Enterprise service to U.S. federal agencies for the bargain price of $1 through next year. So on one hand, you have Altman worried that AI might accidentally take over the world. And on the other hand, you have his company sowing the seeds that may cause AI dependence at the highest levels of our country. So, Jim, I want to go to you on this first because we have conversations about this in the office. What, especially from like the perspective of you being in the think tank business for this long, one of the main roles of think tanks like the Heartland Institute is to analyze public policy for policymakers. And aren't you at least a little worried that some percentage of policymakers out there will just take the nice and easy shortcut of just saying, hey, ChatGPT, is this policy proposal sound? Be brief. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, a lot of thoughts on this. I mean, I think it's. I knew you wouldn't be able to resist getting into the AI discussion here. It's like catnip for you. You're pretty obsessed with it, and it is a really interesting conversation because it is happening very, very quickly, and it's really difficult for people to even get their heads around it because things are happening so fast. It is improving all of the time. But Climate Bell, one of our viewers here, had a comment in the chat alluding to the fact that you have to double check AI all the time. That you find, if you know what you're talking about, if you ask ChatGPT a question and you know the answer because you're an expert in that field, you will obviously see that AI makes mistakes. The problem here is that a lot of people, and the younger they are, I would think, the less they're able to identify mistakes, just have all of this trust in AI. So of the three scenarios, I mean, the third option that Sam Altman described the first thing that came to mind was he's describing an incomprehensible, benevolent God. Right. This entity that we don't understand, that doesn't actually really exist in the physical sense, other than data centers, I suppose. But the idea that AI, I mean, I don't know about this. The idea that AI can accidentally take over the world, like Mr. Magoo, fumbling into something. Into power, or to figuring out how to run the world, or Inspector Clouseau, accidentally solves the case. I mean, how is AI supposed to accidentally take over the world? I don't know how that would work. But bringing it back before Sam gets in here, bringing it back to the Swedish politician, was it the prime minister, or was it saying that he relies on AI to help him make decisions? That's not good. I mean, as I said on the podcast last week, I like to I play baseball trivia in text threads with my friends, my college friends, and I'll look up a kind of an interesting category, name the top 5 guys, with stolen bases in the 1990s, and then they'll just keep naming names until they figure it out. I asked ChatGPT the answer to that question, and it always gets it wrong, even though it's pretty easy to look up that information. So my trust of AI is very low. It's not that I don't trust Chinese AI, which obviously, as we see from this thumbnail, is garbage. But even Sam Altman's ChatGPT is, I know, Donnie, I'm sorry. Keep getting on you for that. But even the best AI that we have here in the United States is very, very far from flawless. So I don't know obviously AI cannot be trusted, not because it's going to turn into Skynet and take over and enslave humans, or create the Matrix and keep us all as batteries to fuel the data centers. But I don't think AI is good enough to take over the world. If it can't figure out the right answers to a baseball trivia question that I have in my head, how's it going to figure out the nuclear codes? I don't think it's going to do that, and I don't think anybody should really be relying on AI unless, like, actually, I'll confess this before I shut up, but I actually used AI this morning for one of the topics we're going to talk about today, and that's the federalization of Washington D.C. And I couldn't remember if it was the chief of police or the head of the D.C. police union that supported Trump's move to bring in the National Guard. So I asked Grok, and it said it was the head of the D.C. police union that supported Trump's move to federalize, basically put the National Guard out to crack down on crime in Washington, D.C. And it provided 25 different links that I could double check it. And so I did. And for that, AI could be very useful because it's very fast. It's basically a smarter Google search. But other than that, I don't really know how these scenarios that Sam Altman is envisioning are really going to come to be. I am becoming more and more skeptical about that as the days go on.
Yeah, well, even in his example, he talked about, the scenario where the president realizes that he can't do better than the recommendations from ChatGPT 7, right? So 5 just released. So he's talking about 2 iterations down. This technology is only getting better. And the way that it accidentally takes over the world is according to Sam Altman's scary scenario here, is that basically, like, if you decided that you were going to just outsource all of your decision making to artificial intelligence, and you were just, every decision that you were met with, you asked it and you did what it suggested. Are you really controlling your own life, or is AI controlling your life? And if you expand that out to a national level, that's what he's talking about, or a global level, that's what he's talking about. If ChatGPT 7 is making all of the decisions, then isn't it kind of running the world? That sort of thing. So the concept that I really tried to drive into people's heads is that AI doesn't need to become self-aware or conscious or some human level or super intelligent level to have massive implications into how society operates. Like I said, I love Terminator science fiction, but like Sam Altman, this scenario is probably the one that I'm most concerned about, with an extra layer that he doesn't mention about that the AI that people are using as a replacement of their critical thinking is encoded with an agenda-driven perspective. So, like, my worst case scenario is a woke ESG artificial intelligence system that's driving a substantial part of the decision-making in this country, both at like an actual like executive level and just on a personal level. But I don't want to dwell too long on this. So Sam, comments on this, and then we'll move on to our kind of more main topics.
Yeah, I agree with you, Donald, that AI has a certain amount of danger to it in people trusting it too much. But what I think is the trust problem is that AI, as Jim pointed out, it's really not trustworthy. All AI is more sophisticated algorithms that generate more heat and require big servers. And interestingly enough, they're generating a lot of heat intellectually as well. But what happens is all AI does is it just predicts what the next word or next sentence will be. And the way it does that is by looking at the internet and looking at what already has been said about things. So it really is not capable of doing truly creative things, truly inventive things, and truly innovative things. So what AI is going to do is tamp down the creativity of human beings if people rely on that. But I think the people who are most creative and who are most interested in probing into the unknown are going to either use AI as just a supplement and as Jim Lakely pointed out, check it, make sure that it got things right, or just ignore it altogether and say, yeah, okay, I've got your information. I know what the web is saying about this. I need to know what is actually true. So I think that there is a danger in that too many people trusting it will just reinforce. It becomes an echo chamber, a great big one. So that is a danger. But I think true creativity will always be sustained, always exist, despite AI, because as long as the government doesn't suppress it and say, well, you have to do whatever the AI tells you.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I could respond to all of those points and refute some of the things, but in the effort of staying somewhat close to an hour on this show, I think we're going to just leave it for now. We're about 2.5 years into this like AI revolution, if we want to just kind of take like the Chat GPT 3.5 as that starting benchmark. And I think it's very hard to predict what the next 2.5 years are going to look like, let alone the next 10 years. So surely we'll be talking about this in the future, especially if you have me on. So let's move on to our kind of our main topics, I guess. So you heard it in the intro. You probably read it in the description of this video. But I want to lead off this main topic discussion by talking about this National Review article titled "Donald Trump is Truly Historic," written by Rich Lowry. Now, before we get into the subject matter of the article, I want to set up a little context here for those that aren't super familiar with National Review. It's not exactly a pro-Trump publication. In fact, in February of 2016, right as the Republican primaries were about to start, National Review released their magazine with a front cover with big gold words that just said "against Trump," right? Yep. And since then, the publication has been very critical of Trump. And to be fair, they've had plenty of good things to say about him too, here and there. It's not like some, never Trump magazine. But I don't know, maybe you know it better than I do, Sam or Jim, but it would be safe to say that National Review is one of the more prominent right of center publications that's probably been most critical of Trump.
100%. Yeah. I mean, National Review has been the conservative Bible. I mean, I read it as a teenager. And so, and as an aspiring journalist, I consider National Review to be my dream job. I wouldn't consider that anymore, but yeah, they're probably the most prominent never Trump publication with the biggest audience and the most history.
Right. So that kind of sets up like why this article is like particularly interesting. And when it comes to the author of the article, Rich Lowry, he's the editor-in-chief at National Review. He is not a huge defender of Donald Trump by any means. I don't think he's a never Trumper, but he is not shy about taking Trump to task over whatever may be. So with all of that in mind, it did come as a surprise to many that Lowry would author a piece like this, once again titled "Donald Trump is Truly Historic." So in the piece, Lowry writes, "If you had to sum up President Trump's second term so far in one word, you could do worse than epic. Trump may be on the path to the most consequential presidency since Ronald Reagan's. Even if Trump's second term ended tomorrow, he would have left a significant mark. For all the talk about how he doesn't have core convictions, Trump has favored tariffs for decades and has instituted a tariff regime that, absent discrediting economic turmoil, is likely to endure whether he is succeeded by a Republican or a Democrat. This alone is a momentous achievement, and one that would have seemed almost unthinkable when Trump descended the elevator in 2015 and a relatively free trade consensus prevailed in U.S. policy. I will note that he didn't descend an elevator; it was an escalator. Take that, editor-in-chief Rich Lowry, but that's just an aside. He's brought border crossings to a historic low, and it could be that U.S. experiences negative net migration for the first time in 50 years. Again, this is a big change and one that is hard to imagine anyone besides Donald Trump affecting. He's dealt a blow to DEI programs in the federal government and is making it harder for colleges and universities to pursue race-conscious policies. His election coincided with the beginning of the pullback from DEI in the private sector, one that his administration has encouraged and accelerated. He signed a tax and spending bill that makes permanent the tax cuts from his first term, makes a substantial investment in immigration enforcement, and includes a meaningful reform of Medicaid. He bombed the Iranian nuclear program, at the very least setting it back for years. He cajoled commitments for greater defense spending out of NATO countries. Almost any one of these items would have been a notable first 6 months accomplishment, but he's done them all, and lots of other activity besides. His EPA administrator, Lee Zeldin, and his energy officials are rolling back the left's climate agenda. Trump defunded public broadcasting. He's kneecapped the Department of Education. The administration has taken important steps to protect female sports and to keep minors from being subjected to gender-affirming care. So, I mean, love him or hate him, after reading that, it's very difficult to argue that we are not living pretty squarely in the age of Trump. So, Sam, I'm going to go to you first on this one. What do you think about this article and whether it's particularly noteworthy that this article exists and was published by National Review?
Thanks, Don. The article just accepts reality. Really, it's just obvious what Trump has achieved is extraordinary and historic, and to deny that is just silly. But people do that. The interesting thing to me is that National Review, really for many years, literally decades, had been moving in a direction that was sort of DC centric, and they had moved their the sort of the center of their idea generation from New York to DC, and that was I think a decline in the quality of the thinking of that magazine. And I will acknowledge that accompanied my writings for National Review, as I've written many articles for them over the years since the 1990s, and I stopped in the early 2010s, and because of where they were going intellectually, it wasn't very good, I didn't think. And remember that National Review, they're famous for getting the John Birch Society out of the conservative movement and in the 1960s, and that was a big deal. But even more importantly, they got Pat Buchanan out of the conservative movement and branded him as an anti-Semite, which is absolutely 100% false and inaccurate. And they continued to play this role of policing the right. So when I conceived of them as never Trump all along. I didn't feel they were fair to Trump in any way. You could find articles in there that weren't as bad as some of the others, but overall, you remember they pretty much said Trump bad, and that was it. So National Review had taken that position, and what's consequential about what Lowry has done is he said, basically, okay, we were wrong, although I'm not going to say that explicitly. We were wrong. Trump is a big dude. He's been really good. We have to give him credit. And okay, so now we're going to move on. Well, you know what? I think there may be a lot of people who aren't going to forget what National Review has done over the decades in policing the right and making it more of a quote unquote bipartisan situation and bending over for the Democrats and creating the uniparty and so forth. Those days are over. They're aware of that, and it's all Trump. Trump did that. Trump ended all that, and so they're just acknowledging reality and trying to get back in the game. Okay, you're back in. Say what you want, and we'll do what we've done all along. We'll judge everything you say by what it says and not what you say you are. So there you go.
Right. Yeah, Jim, I'm curious, after me essentially reading like 90% of that article, like I was kind of waiting for like the big but this is why it's bad or something like that, and it really didn't come. There's a couple little sides talking about like what the next Democrat could theoretically do to undo some of this or whatever, but like that was a pretty glowing piece from National Review. What are your reactions to this?
Well, I know Rich Lowry a little bit, just a very little bit, and I've read him for a long time. And I don't know, when I read that article, I don't know if Sam did as well. I sensed a tone of sadness that he has to write this. It just seemed like there was some sighing and a little bit of crying, and it seemed very reluctant to write this piece. But he sums it up at the end by saying that Steve Hayward wrote on what he called the age of Reagan in the 80s, and Art Schlesinger wrote the age of Jackson and the age of Roosevelt. And Rich Lowry, I think, reluctantly has to come to the conclusion that because of this very significant presidency, you could even pretend he didn't have a first term. Just this term alone, we are living in the age of Trump. Now, a part of this is that nobody's going to remember Joe Biden. I mean, what were his accomplishments? What of his agenda still exists? I mean, he did enormous damage to the country. He put DEI on blast. I'm sure many of our listeners and viewers remember that when Joe Biden first started his presidency, he stated explicitly that equity would be the guiding principle of his government, and it was, to disastrous results. Again, that put DEI on blast, not just in the government, but in corporate boardrooms. He facilitated and encouraged that infamous quote from Larry Fink that we have to force behaviors. He basically brought in a regime of force, of social force, force from Hollywood, bullying, censorship. So there's a lot of damage that was done in Biden's term. I mean, hell, even FEMA disaster aid workers would pass houses and not give aid to anybody who had a Trump sign in their front yard, for crying out loud, under the excuse that they were afraid, they didn't feel safe. We don't hear this kind of stuff anymore. People don't talk about feeling unsafe as much as they used to, and being unsafe meaning somebody has an opinion that I disagree with, and that makes me unsafe. We don't. There's been, and Rich Lowry does talk about it in this piece, and we've talked about it a lot on this podcast. There was that vibe shift that was happening during the 2024 election, and I think what we've really seen is a significant and very real cultural change, and it really did happen in 2024, and that just seems more and more like it's over. Again, as Rich Lowry points out, he's doubtful that the University of Pennsylvania is going to go back to allowing men to compete in women's swimming anymore, even if Trump, well, let's just say a Democrat, he does think this is going to happen, and I disagree. He says that if a Democrat wins the White House in 2028, because a lot of what Donald Trump has done has been unilateral and through executive orders, and that is true, and I hope that Congress will actually make a lot of these policies more solid by actually passing laws, and we can get into that, and it's a crime that they're not doing this because the American people support these policies. But even if Gavin Newsom was to win the White House in 2028, I have a hard time believing he's going to spend all of his political capital to bring all the woke and DEI stuff back, not just to government, but to Ivy League schools and all this stuff. I just have a feeling, maybe I'm being naive, that these changes are, for the most part, permanent, because these are the policies that make common sense. These are policies that have broad support across parties in America. People just know that a lot of this DEI stuff is unfair, and all of that stuff. And so this is a enormously significant presidency already. As you noted at the top of the podcast, Donnie, we're 6 months in. 6 months. It feels like 6 years. I mean, the amount of stuff, I think Donald Trump has accomplished more in 6 months than Obama did in 8 years. And I said it in Trump 1.0, just by what he was doing or trying to do back then, that he was already in his first term, I thought, more significant politically and culturally than Ronald Reagan was for his 2 terms in the 1980s. And he's accomplishing more right now in these 6 months because he's in a hurry, because he knows he only has, maybe, depends on how the midterm elections go, he really only has about another, at most 18 months to get his agenda through. So he is not stopping. He is not slowing down at all. And like it or not, and I don't think Rich Lowry likes it very much, but we are living in the age of Trump. But the upshot of that is that almost every policy that he is putting forth and bringing into being has actual broad support among Americans, among normal Americans. I can't think of one policy of the Biden years that actually had broad popular support. I can't think of one. And so that's what's so exciting about the age of Trump, is that the normies are back in charge.
Yeah, there was think it was this article. Maybe it was something else that I was reading, but I think it was this article where it had this line that was talking about how that Trump's presidency coincided with this cultural shift, and whether or not he was the result of it or kind of the originator of it. There's probably a mixture of both of those factors or something. But I think like that is absolutely true. I mean, we talk about like that whole pendulum swinging concept or whatever. And it's just like the state of kind of politics and the political discourse that's going on today compared to, pre-Trump or something, in my opinion, is radically different. So whether or not how much you want to attribute that to Trump or, the other way around is a subject of debate. But it really does feel like every day there's some new big announcement. Like, I remember it's not that long ago, it seemed infeasible that we would ever see the end of the endangerment finding. Then on some random Tuesday, we get word that it's actually happening. And like, I think just yesterday we got word that the administration is going to drive a stake into the EV mandates on car makers. Like, that's something that Heartland Institute's been talking about for who knows how long. I don't know how long. It's been a long time, right? And it's like, now it's seemingly happening as just like a little, sub bullet point on this larger list of things that were going on. And it's just, you guys, it might be a surprise to some viewers, but you two are a little older than I am. So you probably have a little bit more of a context window for this next feeling that I have. And you can correct me if I'm wrong or not. But to me, it feels like when a president comes in, especially if it's like a changing from left to right or right to left, that president has like a one particular thing that they want to get done. Like Barack Obama was the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, whatever, right? Everyone's got like this one thing that if they can get that across, that'll be their legacy. Obama's legacy is the ACA. That's basically it, right? And it's like with Trump, like there's like a dozen things. Like, it really feels like, is this so outside the norm, or is it just me being a mid-30s guy that's only experienced in consciousness a handful of presidencies? Is this outside the norm that you've got like a president coming in with this much of a wrecking ball mindset when it comes to governing? What are your thoughts, Sam?
I think that the thing that people don't seem to recognize about Donald Trump is that he has a mission. He has an idea that he wants to make real. And that idea is to sweep away decades of American government that have taken power away from the people, power away from the states, power away from the communities, taken over our national institutions, such as the universities, many of the churches. So many of our institutions have been corrupted by action from the left. And Trump's idea was, well, that's the problem. Okay. So, well, how do we solve that problem? And that then comes to the level of strategy. During his first administration, Trump was continuously undermined by the uniparty in Congress and by his own people within his own administration. And yes, you can blame him for appointing them, but who was there? Trump's idea was brand new. Republicans had always had this conservative idea where we're going to go slowly in dialing back the massive amount of government interference in this country because we don't want to rile things up. We're conservative. What Trump is and always was is a reformer. And reformers do rile things up. Reformers take things down and tear them down so that you can rebuild on the rubble. And what Trump then has done in his second term is he took advantage of the 4 years that let's say that the people in power in this country and our various institutions and so forth took away from him. One way or another, we know that the 2020 election was very strongly influenced by events that had nothing to do with Donald Trump's policies. So those 4 years were taken away from him. Well, he didn't waste time during those 4 years. He moved forward in developing not just a strategy, but developing the team that would follow up on that strategy. In addition, one thing that he did during his first term that was absolutely essential to all the change we've seen since was the Supreme Court. Those justices that he added to the court have changed the ground. They've made it possible to get rid of a whole lot of the regulation that previous administrations had done, and that in the present case, the Biden administration does. And one last quick thing. Much of what Trump has done, yes, it's a lot by executive order and the like, but much of it has already been codified in statute, in federal law. The One Big Beautiful Bill, for example, has in it not just the Medicaid work requirement, not just that, it's got a work requirement now for food stamps, which there never was. So all of that is in the statutes, and there's plenty of it there. So a lot of this is permanent, but the other problem is that if Democrats get in again, as you saw with Joe Biden, the so-called Joe Biden administration, if they get in again, there is a tendency just to ignore the law, as the Biden administration did. So you need to keep the political power. And Trump has been able to get back in power with a good plan, good strategy to fulfill this mission of dialing back all that power that the government has taken away from the people of the United States of America.
Yeah, let me just, hedge some of this seemingly pro-Trump rhetoric that we're talking about here, because we could be as critical as the next guy when it comes to certain Trump things. And I'm sure that we've talked about just the increased national debt and some of these other issues. And it's funny, like some issues, and I know I've been part of conversations that don't really pertain to issues that we talk about, on this show or at the Heartland Institute or whatever. It's just like, again, like the pace at which all of this stuff is happening. That's just like, oh, I'm critical of Trump when it comes to this issue. And then one day later, it's like something else is happening. That's like, oh, but I'm in support of that. So there's just like love, like I said, love him or hate him. Like, I don't think you can dispute how consequential he is. And I think that even the left, like the most anti-Trump people out there, would probably agree, mostly for like campaign reasons. They're trying to really amp him up as the bad guy that needs to be defeated, talking about how influential he's being. But yeah, I mean, I think that looking back in history, I mean, just standing here in history, it's so obvious that this is going to be this is a history book moment. Like I remember the idea of, well, that guy can't be president. He's never been governor, or he's never been, this level of, when it comes to governing, he's never reached this level. So he can't possibly be the nominee. It's like Donald Trump has destroyed all of these, whatever predisposed thoughts when it comes to this stuff. So yeah, age of Trump. Jim, final thoughts on this, and we'll move on to our next topic.
Yeah, I mean, by the definition you just laid out there, Pete Buttigieg is apparently more qualified to be president than Donald Trump, and I think that is not the case. I think Donald Trump is proving that over his 2 terms. But I know you guys will agree with this, and what I think people are going to look back, and we should recognize it now. People look back at what was Donald Trump's greatest accomplishment, because there's going to be a list. There's going to be such a long list of policies that he had reversed or instituted. His use of tariffs as a negotiating tactic like no president has ever done. What Donald Trump has done is he has moved dramatically the Overton window of what is politically and culturally possible, and swung it very, very fast in the right direction, to the point where people are having real conversations about, hey, why are we counting illegal immigrants who are not citizens of this country in the census? That doesn't make any sense. Hey, why don't we just crack down on illegal immigration? It can maybe it can possibly be done and we can stop it. That was considered impossible literally 6 months ago. And now illegal border crossings are basically zero, which we were told for decades is impossible. You cannot get a handle on this situation. Well, yes, you can. And you just run down the list of topics and political topics and cultural topics that were taboo. You couldn't even speak about them. Now people are having real conversations. We're having real conversations about tariffs. Should a president really have this much power to impose tariffs on foreign countries and direct trade in such a way? We're having that conversation because no president before Trump has ever attempted anything like this. And what we're seeing is that all of the predictions from the smart economists that Trump's foolish, he doesn't know what he's doing, and he's going to cause massive runaway inflation and unemployment and all, none of that stuff came to pass. He is defying all of the experts and making a lot of them look like idiots because he is boldly moving that Overton window and redefining the baseline of how we talk about politics and policy in this country. That is what people are going to remember 10, 20 years from now. If they don't remember all of the policy accomplishments, that is the thing that they will remember, that he moved that window and really shook up so much of how we can even speak about things.
Yep, no doubt. Man, it's quite a story too. I mean, like, having this story, the age of Trump, and we haven't even referenced the assassination attempt and that whole image that'll be again in textbook. Books will be written on all of this. But anyways, let's move on. For the next segment, I might have to, have Jim or Sam walk us through this one. I'll do my best. At the tail end of last week, I believe, there was some chatter that Trump was going to take action on federalizing Washington, D.C. in order to rein in the rampant crime that has been plaguing our nation's capital. There was a press conference on Monday where Trump and administration members ordered a ramp up in federal policing throughout D.C. Trump declared a public safety emergency under the Home Rule Act, placing D.C.'s Metropolitan Police Department under federal direction. The National Guard has been deployed. So Jim or Sam, raise your hand if you want to take first swing at this. What is going on here? Break this down for me.
Go, Sam.
Well, thank you. One important element of this is that he can't federalize Washington, D.C. because Washington, D.C. is federal. The Congress is given power in the Constitution to govern Washington, D.C. Congress has the power. And what they have done is in recent decades, they gave over what is called home rule and said, okay, D.C., you can have this government and you can do this and that and the other. We'll delegate that to you. And Congress does have the authority to delegate those things, but they don't have the authority to delegate overall power. They have the authority over Washington, D.C. So Trump is not federalizing Washington, D.C. in any way. But what he is doing is acting as the executive and taking over some of the, not even taking over, technically he's supplementing activities of the Washington, D.C. government. So he's just supplementing, and he's doing the same thing that he tried to do in California and in other states where he's trying to assist governments that are, let's say, less than 100% effective at a variety of things. And in the case of California, he was protecting federal agents, ICE, and so forth. So these are all perfectly valid things for a president to do. Presidents haven't done them because they didn't want to take the heat that they would get for doing these things. And Trump just doesn't give a hang anymore. He's almost 80 years old, and he is who he is. So that's the fun part of it. So, but the reality also is that in terms of what they're doing, they're out there looking to make sure that the people in Washington, D.C. know that there's a police presence. And I don't think it matters much to people. Is this person getting arrested by a local cop or a federal cop? I don't think it really matters much. It matters only to those who believe that everything Trump does is wrong and everything Trump does is evil. And And I'm not. I look at things as what are the results of this policy, and what are you trying to do? And in a case like this, what Trump is trying to do is quite legitimate. The crime problem is awful in Washington, D.C., and we should get into a little bit of discussion about that, whether those numbers are that they're giving about the decrease in crime, whether they're really accurate, whether they're really plausible, not just in Washington, D.C., but around the country. So this is an important issue, but anybody knows. They have people saying, "Oh, I walked around Washington D.C. the other day, and it was just terrific." I mean,
wait.
in the
I want to
park
highlight that point. That point. We'll come back to you before the end of this segment, but because I've got two articles in the show notes that are just like complete polar opposites of each other. One's from the Federalist. I love the Federalist. That is titled, "Yes, D.C. is just as bad as Trump says it is," comparing that to Slate magazine, which the title of their article is "Trump's DC Takeover. Here's what the feds are really doing," right? And in that latter article, the Slate author talks about how they recently walked around the nation's capital and basically just saw tourists having fun and taking pictures. I'm literally going to read you a line out of this. "What I witnessed was an idyllic sense of American tourism. A nerd in a Millennium Falcon shirt made a beeline for the Air and Space Museum. A French-speaking couple took videos of each other trying to mount their Lime scooters. A set of parents and their adult children sat in the shade of some trees, giddily sucking down rocket pops. A time traveler from 2014 using a selfie stick to get a shot of their whole family in front of the Capitol building." So it's like the takeaway of this article, right, is that there's no crime in Washington, D.C. That's just a concoction of, the Trump administration, these other wannabe fascists and all of that. And Trump's just trying to take over D.C. for fun, I guess. I don't know. So Jim, I mean, I don't know. I haven't been to D.C. in a while. Do you think that it's more like the Federalists saying that it's just as bad as Trump says it is? Or do you think this author from Slate magazine is a little more on target?
That Slate magazine story is so hilarious. That's like you're on the Titanic, and after it hits the iceberg, you're like, but the champagne is still cold. I don't know what everyone's complaining about. Look, the head of as I mentioned earlier, thank you, Grok, for confirming this for me, that the head of the police union in Washington, D.C. supports what is basically supplemental force to crack down on crime in Washington, D.C. And the Democrats are running around acting like crime is not a problem in D.C. and that this is an overreaction. Look, I lived in Northern Virginia and I worked at the Washington Times. Now, this was 20 years ago, but the Washington Times headquarters, their building is in Northeast D.C., which is not a very nice part of D.C. Again, that was 20 years ago, but I can't imagine it's gotten much better. And what this person is describing, hey, I'm walking around D.C., look, at the Smithsonian, I see a nerd in a Millennium Falcon shirt going into the Air and Space Museum. It's like, well, sure, the tourist areas in D.C. are nice, but outside of the touristy areas, D.C. is a shithole, and everybody knows it. When I covered Congress, I used to take the train into Union Station, which is down Capitol Hill. And it's a beautiful historic building. It kind of takes you back in time. You feel like you're 100 years ago, and that there should be horse-drawn carriages coming across in the front. In fact, I think the carriage areas were still in existence there. But it started to deteriorate 20 years ago when I used to go there. And now, by all accounts, it's homeless encampments and open drug use. And it's just not great. And, one of the things Donald Trump said on his when he was on the campaign trail, I remember this, is he's like, we don't have to live this way with all the crazy stuff that was happening in the country. It's like, we don't have to live like this. And he's saying to Washington, D.C., you don't have to live like this. People should remember where Donald Trump is from, New York City. He was there when Rudy Giuliani turned New York City, which was a complete shithole, into the safest, largest city in the world, and made it into a world-class tourist destination. So he knows that this can be done if you have the will to do it. And he's looking around Washington, D.C. and thinks nobody here has the will to do it. So I'll do it, because this country deserves a safe and clean capital city. and not just at the Washington Monument, which isn't as clean as you might think it's said sometimes, or at the other memorials, but all through Washington, D.C. I'll just say one more thing. Maybe we can move on to the redistricting thing. But I believe it was Mike Lee on X had a whole string of posts that made so much sense. And it's just give Washington, D.C., just give the district back to Maryland, from which we took it. The purpose of having a independent or a federal district for the capital city of the United States of America was so that there wouldn't be any undue influence by a state. This was back when states mattered a lot, but there wouldn't be any undue influence either negatively or positively from that state, right? So just take every federal building and call that a federal district. You don't have to call it District of Columbia anymore. You can just call it whatever you want. And then give the rest of the land that used to belong to Maryland in the city of Columbia, just give that back to Maryland. We only need to federalize the parts that the federal government actually owns and occupies. We don't need all of Northeast DC belonging to the district, belonging to the federal government, run by Congress sometimes, home rule other times. Just do that, and all these problems are solved. And then especially if you oppose Donald Trump taking over DC, well, as president, he would just take over the federal buildings, which he has jurisdiction over anyway. So hopefully, Mike Lee, I think you can probably introduce legislation and have this happen. I don't think you necessarily need a constitutional amendment to cede that land back to Maryland, because Arlington County, Virginia, used to be the part of that federal district as well. If you ever look on a map, DC is basically a north-south triangle, and the southern part of that triangle, which is on the other side of the Potomac River, used to be part of the district, and they gave it back to Virginia. So the same thing can be done on the other side. I think that's an idea whose time has definitely come, and if there's any president that could probably make that happen, it's this one.
Yeah, it's funny that you use the S-hole term.
Sorry, I had to say it twice.
Because the first thought that was coming through my head when I was reading that Slate magazine thing was when Conan O'Brien went to Haiti to prove that it was some beautiful place or something like that. Right. Sam, final comments on this, and then we're going to go to our last topic.
Thank you. One quick thing is it's interesting that Trump, he could have chosen any time to do this, quite frankly, but he chose August. And I think that tells you what his strategy is, which is that Congress is out of session. So they can't vote an extension of because you only get 30 days to do this. You only get 30 days under the emergency that he's declared. So after 30 days, he would have to get a declaration from Congress, either extending the deadline or taking it away altogether and saying that you can do this anytime you want. So what he's doing, in fact, is while Congress is out of session, he's demonstrating what it would look like to have this in place, with the federal government supplementing the local government. And that gives Congress, and obviously the Republicans in Congress, since no Democrat will vote for this, but that gives them an opportunity to say, look, it's working, let's give it a chance.
Yeah, it's a very interesting story. I'm very curious to see how it plays out. And I'm sure that we'll be talking about it on this show in weeks coming up. But let's get to our last topic here, which is this redistricting of Texas and the specter of Gavin Newsom and his various threats. So this story has been going on for a little bit. It's this idea that Texas is going to redistrict their districts, right? Outside of a census year, and this is just, everyone's got an opinion on this and why this is breaking precedent and why no, this is actually fine to do and what have you. So the latest on it is that Texas actually did pass this plan to redistrict, and I think that it has to just be approved by the Senate at this point or something. Maybe that's already happened in the last day, but I know that this plan is actually moving forward in Texas. And this would result potentially in Texas basically having districts that would support 5 more Republican. It would basically be a shift of 5 in the House of Representatives towards Republicans. So because of this, Gavin Newsom, which I really think that he's kind of taking this and using it as a platform to really kind of push what I think is a very obvious presidential interest runs, the next general election, to fight back against this perceived Republican overreach and say that if Texas does this, California is going to follow suit. We're going to do the same thing. So, Jim, I'm going to hand it over to you on this one. Feel free to talk about the actual redistricting itself. I'm less interested in that and more interested in kind of Gavin Newsom positioning himself to be the anti-Trump in 2028. But what are your thoughts on this, Jim?
Well, the idea that California needs to retaliate for what Texas is doing is absurd. I mean, California, 43% of voters in California are Republicans, and they have, I think, 17% representation in Congress. This is making a mountain out of a molehill, a tempest in a teacup, any kind of cliche you want to make of it. The fact of the matter is, every Democrat every blue state is gerrymandered to within an inch of its life. I sent a link to Andy, the producer. We might put it on screen, but we've had some technical difficulties on his computer today. But the idea that that the Democrats in Texas flee to this state, to Illinois, to protest redistricting that would take away some of the power of Democrats in Texas is absurd. Look, if you look at these maps, this is basically going back, way back. I think that first image there is from what is that? Gosh, even the 18. So it starts in 1833. There are only 3 districts there, but as you see over the century, and plus, for the most part, it was drawn with pretty good geographic representation. So, and that's important. That's what the districts are supposed to be. But now you look at it right here. I mean, if you're in the 13th district, that's a Democrat district, and it is it basically just follows an absurd snake. And if you're in the 15th district, you have to go all the way to the border of Indiana and then come back all the way to the border near St. Louis, and as part of your district. I mean, this was drawn by Democrats, and this is just the way the game is played. Look, it's politics, and the party in power every 10 years, and sometimes between that decadal space, get to draw or redraw district lines, and they draw them to maximize their party's power in Congress. Every time, this is how it is done, and Democrats have been doing it for decades. Republicans have been doing it for decades. The idea that this is somehow new and outrageous and against democracy is just yet another instance of Democrats losing their minds, inflating something as a threat to democracy when it's just normal politics, and this is the way it's been forever. And the reason why, it's and the idea of doing it before 2030 and redrawing districts now, I mean, that does happen on occasion. It is not unprecedented. In fact, New York State, a blue state run by Democrats, redrew their districts, I believe, in 2024. That's last year. So the idea that this is only done every 10 years is absurd. And then one point I'm sure a lot of our listeners and viewers know about this already. The Census Bureau has admitted that they miscounted in several states. And this is important because your state's population determines how many electoral college votes you get in a presidential election. It also determines how many representatives you get in the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. They undercounted in several states. Every one of those states was a red state. And they overcounted some other states. Every one that was overcounted was a blue state. Now, I'm not saying this was done on purpose, but boy, that's a hell of a coincidence. And so we actually, right now, are not properly represented in either the Electoral College or in Congress as a nation. And I think it makes sense to correct that now, not wait until 2030, halfway through the administration of a future president. We deserve this to be done now, and I'm for it. And I hope that Donald Trump is no wilting flower. He's going to push forward with this as much as he can and encourage the states to follow suit.
Sam, anything you want to add? Go ahead.
Yeah, please. Newsom he's doing this for political gain, and that's all. The reality is that they have, unlike most states, they actually have to have a referendum. They have to have the public approve this which they would, and so that they could change it next year. That's a big step. But I assume that they would find a way for that to pass the referendum. But other states, the Republicans have 23 states where they have trifectas, where they have the state both houses of the state legislature and the governorship. So if you want to start a gerrymandering war, the Republicans have 23 states and you have 15. Now, some of your states are pretty big and have a lot of electoral votes, but there are a lot of electoral votes on the Republican side as well. So if you do this, maybe states like Indiana and Ohio and North Carolina, join in. So, and not North Carolina because they don't have a trifecta, but other states could join in. So don't start something that you don't know you can win. And Newsom has done this. And I think that if he starts a gerrymandering war and he tries to blame Governor Abbott of Texas for this, he's going to look very bad going into 2028. That, hey, you know what? You guys actually ruined the 2026 election for us. Or you, Newsom in particular, ruined 2026 for us. So, and besides, that party is pretty much moving farther and farther to the left. I think they're actually outpacing Newsom. He doesn't seem to be where that party is going anyway. But the fact is, if you start a gerrymandering war, you are going to lose it. And the Supreme Court has already sort of let loose gerrymandering, and it's going to. I think the Supreme Court is actually going to get rid of race-based gerrymandering altogether, which completely changes the situation, and that will be very destructive to the electoral prospects of the Democrat Party.
Yeah, there was I forget what state it was. It was like Vermont or New Hampshire or something like that. One of these governors came out like, "Well, we're going to redistrict too," and it's like, "Oh, really? How are you going to redistrict to make the two representatives more blue? That doesn't make any sense." But
right. I mean, I looked it up just in California. I mean, I looked it up. I mean, there's 52 Congress critters from California. 9 of them are Republicans. And I was right in my guess. That is 17%. 17. 38% of Californians voted for Trump. So, yeah, if Gavin Newsom wants to play this game, he's not going to win it.
Right. Jim, that's 38% of the ones who were counted.
That's true. That's true. Look, and look, it's the reason why. Let's be clear. The reason why the Democrats are basically, they will die on this hill because their political prospects are dead if they don't win. They talk about in the presidential elections the so-called blue wall that Kamala Harris was supposed to be able to capture in order to take the White House, that being Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan. Well, if I believe Michigan was one of those states that was overcounted. So if you take away, if you accurately count, putting aside counting or not counting illegal immigrants in this country who are not citizens, you should only be counting citizens, in my opinion, but that's what the Constitution says. It's a little unclear. It'll be challenged in court. That's we can do a whole other show on that. But if the states were properly counted, that blue wall wouldn't even be wouldn't help. It wouldn't hurt. The Democrats will have a really hard time winning any presidential election if with the trends being what they were, because Florida would be gaining seats, Texas would be gaining seats, and more importantly, a lot of the blue states are losing seats, which means they are losing the count in the Electoral College. It's going to be very hard it's going to be a lot harder, I should say, for a Democrat to win the presidency with a proper and accurate census.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was talk about Gavin Newsom kind of being the guy when it was pretty obvious that Joe Biden wasn't going to be the guy in the latest general election. I kind of was like, not so sure about that. Obviously, it didn't end up being the guy. But the way that he is portraying himself on Twitter and the amount of engagement farming that he is trying to do, I think he's glommed onto this issue because it kind of gives him a national presence. It's not just like a California specific thing, trying to make this gerrymandering thing a national issue where he's positioning himself as the counterpoint to, Trump or whatever, the Republican effort at the very least. I think this is all, like I said, positioning for him to be the the nominee in 2028, and I would actually put money on it. I would, I know that there's some betting websites out there. I don't know what the odds are at this current moment, but I'm considering throwing a few bucks at that idea, because I think that he, just based on the way that he's operating on Twitter, like, I think that is clearly the move that's going on here. But all right, that's
this effort will go. I'm just going to say this effort will go just as well as his famous debate with Ron DeSantis, where he basically just stepped on rake after rake after rake. So go, Gavin.
Go, Gavin. All right, well, that's going to do it. I will point out that we did an entire episode, and was there a Jim rant in there? I don't know if there was I don't know if anything rose to the level of a Jim rant, but what I do know is that Jim didn't
cursed
pull
twice.
a Jim.
Does that count? I cursed twice.
But he never pulled a Jim and muted himself while talking. So great job, Jim. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join our show every week. We are streaming this on Twitter or X, YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, every week, Thursdays at noon Central Time, where you could join the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly, show your comments, all that sort of stuff. Like I've said before, we are demonetized by YouTube. So if you want to support the show monetarily, go to heartland.org/inthetank. You can donate directly to the show that way. For those audio only listeners, consider joining us for the live show. But if not, at least leave a review for us on iTunes. That would be greatly appreciated. For those viewers, hit that like button, share this content, subscribe if you haven't already, or just leave a comment under the video. All those things help boost those algorithms, break through the big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from reaching more people. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you other than hosting the Climate Realism Show tomorrow, every week, Fridays at noon Central Time? Where else can they find you, Jim?
At J Lakely on X, at Heartland Inst on X, and always visit heartland.org.
Fantastic. Sam Karnick, where can the fine people find your work?
Thanks. At ST Karnick on X and the like. And also go to the Heartland Institute website and subscribe to Life, Liberty, Property, a weekly newsletter that covers a lot of the same issues that we cover here, and has a little more, has some depth to it. So I think you'll enjoy reading those. And also my Substack, stkarnick.substack.com. So go there and you can get even more.
Fantastic. And make sure to tune in next week. Linnea will be back in the hosting chair. You won't have to look at this ugly mug next week. But thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week.